Urban explorers, what was the creepiest or most mysterious thing you've seen or found during your exploration? There used to be an abandoned psychiatric hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan, that my friends and I would explore on weekend nights back in 2003. It was 4 floors plus a basement, which even included a morgue, and we explored every nook and cranny of that place. Judging by the most recent magazines, sitting in the 4th floor waiting room, it looked like the hospital had closed sometime around 1990. The previous institution had just up and left everything behind, almost Chernobyl style. Furniture, equipment, medications, patient files. By 2003, the place was already broken into and completely trashed by vandals. While the building itself slowly decayed, it honestly looked worse than the hospitals in the Silent Hill games. And that's not even the creepiest or most mysterious part. One time, I walked into a room and saw a mirror that wasn't broken. Everything in this entire building was destroyed. Everything. Except this one pristine mirror still perfectly mounted on the wall. I've never seen anything more out of place, and I still get chills just thinking about it. We were climbing a utility shaft behind a lecture hall that ran up the entire length of the building. At the bottom of the shaft, there were 2 or 3 boxes filled with these black and white pictures of mannequins. Some were out-of-focus headshots of the faceless mannequins, some were pictures of them in compromising positions, and some were just generic-looking shots. Creepy, but whatever. After climbing up 3 or 4 stories, we found a mattress and a blanket. On its own, the mattress would have just been sad or curious, but with those photos down below, it added a whole extra layer of creepy. Whenever we explored around campus, I always joked that I could live in one of those dead spaces if things ever really hit the fan. I guess we actually found someone who was doing exactly that. I explored an abandoned brain trauma rehab center in my area. The most unsettling things in there were the old wheelchairs scattered throughout the building, each one still labeled with a patient's name. And at the end of one hallway, there was a room with a chair that had straps on it, looking like it was used to restrain patients. The handrests on the chair had deep scratch marks, like someone had been clawing to escape, and that part honestly creeped me out the most. When I lived in Rostov-on-Don a couple years ago, I got lost between some old apartment buildings on my way home, and I stumbled into this alley courtyard area, and there was an abandoned Soviet helicopter just sitting there. It was completely covered in graffiti and had no doors, or so I thought, but honestly, it looked pretty cool. I had no idea what it was doing in the middle of a residential alley. Edit. Turns out it did have doors. Haha. Edit. It was an Mi-8. A friend's across the street neighbor's house used to be a junkie pad. The owners finally sold it, and the new owner planned to tear it down. The junkies moved out, and it sat empty for about a month. Before it was demolished, my buddy and I went snooping around the lot. Looking through the windows, we could see tons of personal items still inside. Furniture, decorations, everything. The place was trashed. Then we saw the back door was open. We went inside, and the floors bowed under every step we took. The whole house was dark and this dingy yellow color from years of indoor smoking. Old pictures on the walls, candles everywhere, just junk everywhere. We'd been inside for maybe 10 minutes when we suddenly heard someone in the next room get up and start thrashing things violently. It felt like a scene straight out of The Walking Dead. We ran and never looked back. The house is gone now, but the lot is still full of trash. In a few months, it'll probably be a $400,000 home. Edit. The sound was absolutely a full-grown adult human stomping around. I explored an abandoned toilet factory once. We found a room full of lung x-rays. Then we heard something walking across the tin roof above us, and the slow creak of a door opening in another room, even though all of us were in the x-ray room. Very spooky. 1010. Edit. After doing some research, I found out the huge factory had major worker health issues from inhaling porcelain dust. They basically just up and left the whole place. People had definitely been there before us. Graffiti on the walls, copper pipes ripped out, and among the hundreds, maybe thousands, of toilets in the building, many were smashed. If I ever need 100 toilets for cheap, I know exactly where to go. I came upon a house about 20 minutes outside my tiny town while looking for fishing spots one day. It was a big, 2-story, 4-bedroom farmhouse. It looked like the owners had just gotten up and left. All their belongings were still there, dishes in the sink, a skillet on the stove. In the closet, there were state fair ribbons dating back to 1912. The beds were unmade. There were old church programs from the church I went to as a kid. A typewriter sat on a desk with a sheet of paper that just said, "The." A bird cage in the corner still held a long dead bird. Photos still hung on the walls. But the door to the basement was locked, and I still wonder what was down there. Everything was buried under a thick layer of dust. Animals had gotten inside and left prints everywhere, mostly raccoons. The whole place felt insanely eerie, abandoned for years, yet still feeling like someone's home. I've explored lots of places, but this one felt different. Edit, this was in Iowa. My best theory is that an elderly couple lived there and were moved into a nursing home. Maybe their kids didn't care. The dead bird was especially sad. I was exploring an abandoned hospital near my house with my buddies. The complex was huge. It had a college, living areas, and a massive treatment center. After several weekends of exploring, we found all kinds of cool things. Old surgical equipment, rooms blocked off with radiation warnings, massive mysterious machines. One weekend, we got lost in the main area and found a hidden staircase in a random back room. It led to a floor that wasn't on the plans and wasn't connected to any main stairway. The floor had no windows, so we used our crappy flip phone screens as flashlights. The first room had a human-sized cage inside, a locking door with a little food tray slot, a small cot, and a tiny toilet. We tried to pretend it was something else until we checked the rest of the rooms. Every single one had the same cage. We left immediately. The complex has been torn down since. The only history I found was that part of the facility used to be a mental hospital, so the cages might have been for severely disturbed patients. About 20 minutes from my house, there's this tiny town with one paved road. Follow it to the end and it leads to cliffs with a lighthouse. Along the road is a speed sign with a tiny dot of black spray paint. If you walk straight into the bushes from that dot for about 300 meters, you find an old bomb shelter. My friends and I used to smoke there as teens. It has a spiral staircase, one big room, 2 small rooms, graffiti everywhere, and a little fireplace. Super cool, but creepy. One night at about 1 a.m., my friend and I walked down there. We could see the bomb shelter in the distance and a light flickering inside. We froze. A minute later, we heard chanting. We crept closer. I stepped on a branch, it snapped, and instantly the light went out and the chanting stopped. We sprinted home. We were 15 at the time, and it still freaks me out. Edit. This was in Victoria. I added photos. Not really an urbex person, but I've been in some abandoned places. My husband worked security and sometimes watched a decommissioned hospital/long-term care facility. I'd visit him at night. The building wasn't that old, maybe built in the 80s, but a generator somewhere was still running. The elevators would go up and down all night with no one inside. Doors opening, closing, the whole thing. It never happened on a schedule either. Some rooms still had dried up flower arrangements, empty IV bags, rumpled beds, and belongings left behind. There wasn't an official morgue, but one room was set up like one, untouched, tools in drawers, sheets still over gurneys. One night, we tried turning on every hall light to drain the generator, but on the 5th or 6th floor, we found a still running respirator. That scared me so badly that I never went back. The building was eventually sold and converted into offices. When I was a teenager in a rough part of Ontario, my friends and I used to hang near an abandoned house with an empty pool. One day we went inside and instantly regretted it. A pot full of petrified ramen was jammed into a hole in the wall. Doors and floors had huge dents. There were handprints made of either blood or shit on the ceiling. Pigeon feathers were everywhere, even glued to the walls. We never even went near the backyard again after that. I've got a good one. It definitely scared me, and I'm not someone who gets spooked easily. I had just gotten a new camera and wanted to practice downtown. Buildings were boarded up and chained. One door had a gap we could squeeze through. Inside, the bottom floor was wide open, no walls, just columns. One wall had metal stairs leading up. The second floor was half destroyed, with planks across huge gaps. Unsafe, but we wanted to see more. We started climbing, maybe 30 steps in total. My friend went first, I followed. After 10 steps, we heard someone running down toward us. Boom, boom, boom. We felt the vibrations. The weird part, we could see the top of the stairs. No one was there. We ran out terrified. The only explanation I can imagine is the stairs collapsing, but it sounded exactly like footsteps coming straight at us, and I still don't know what it really was. I once snuck into an old abandoned warehouse with a friend, and the entire place was filled with tractor tires. You literally couldn't see the floor, just a sea of tires everywhere. We worked our way toward a walled-off section that was clearly meant for the foreman's offices. The doors were locked, but the wall only went up about 10 or 12 feet, with nothing but a flimsy particle board roof on top. So we pulled that little roof off, and inside, from floor to ceiling, the whole space was jam-packed with the most random assortment of junk imaginable. Rollerblades, suitcases, baby dolls, newspapers, furniture, clothes, tools, you name it. The really interesting part was finding a milk crate full of 70s porn magazines sitting next to a half-full bottle of ancient muscle relaxers. I had to Google the medication because I'd never even heard of it. The pills must have been at least 30 years old. Me and my roommate went home and decided to try them. We each took one, waited 45 minutes, felt nothing, and figured they'd lost their potency. So we took 4 more each. At some point, while watching TV, I realized I'd been drooling and staring at my own stomach for 4 hours, and the sun was coming up. No. I found an abandoned farmhouse near Lake Lowell in Idaho when I was 16. I probably trespassed, but inside I found a machete lying next to what honestly looked like a door sprayed with blood. I've got pictures on my computer, but I'm on mobile. Happy to share if anyone wants to see. I also found a 6-pack of glass Dr. Pepper bottles in perfect condition. I brought it home and my mom called it trash, then secretly sold it for a pretty good amount. Honestly, I'm still more upset about that than anything creepy in the house. My friends and I managed to get into an abandoned hostel in Singapore through a crumbling wall in the back, since the front gate was still guarded. We were taking extra care climbing up because all the stairwell railings were missing, just a straight drop down the center. On the 4th floor, my friend suddenly jumped back hard and scared all of us. In one of the rooms, the entire space was filled, completely filled, with red thread. Thin thread, but so much of it that it looked like some massive bloody spider nest or the open mouth of some hellish portal. We took one look at that and said nope, left that room untouched and got out fast. Back when my friends and I worked late shifts at Maxi D's, we used to explore the abandoned grounds of Whittingham Hospital, an old mental institution with a dark history. Patient abuse, experimentation, all the worst stuff. By the late 90s, early 2000s, the place was huge, empty, barely guarded, and terrifying. Victorian buildings, wards, halls, a church, like an actual horror movie set. Floors caving in, huge holes to jump across, everything unstable. One time, a friend fell through the floor of an old theater room straight into the basement. Getting him out was horrifying. But 2 moments are burned into my memory forever. The first was when I lost rock, paper, scissors and had to climb through a window to unlock the door of a massive Victorian mansion-like building from the inside. We went in with torches and walked up a huge split staircase, then down a corridor of tiny wards. In one room, all the beds were empty metal frames, except for one. That one had a mattress with a huge dried blood stain on it. When we got back to the main corridor, my friend suddenly freaked out. There were drops of blood on the steps, leading from the ward we had just been in, back downstairs. We were already panicky, and seeing that made us bolt instantly. Didn't return for a while. The second moment was discovering a basement door behind one building, down one of those narrow stone staircases that lead underground. Inside was a pitch-black utility tunnel system. Low ceilings, pipes overhead, barely enough room to stand. After several minutes, we reached a single metal door, the kind you see in movies with a little square hatch at eye level. We pushed it open, terrified, and found one empty room. Completely empty, except for a single metal chair bolted to the floor, and hanging above it from the ceiling were 2 metal chains with wrist restraints attached. We all knew exactly what it was and what must have happened there. Seeing it in that hidden underground chamber, that image will never leave me. I'm not sure if anyone will see this, I spent my childhood on an old abandoned farm. The barns there were mostly run-down buildings with little to explore. The most interesting thing about them was simply the animals that nested up in them. Except this one barn. It was larger than the rest and had all these little coves and crevices. Yet somehow, the upstairs was the creepiest. It seemed to loom over anything that stood by it and always gave off these dark vibes. It seemed mysterious and untrustworthy, and for some reason, my father felt the need to board up its windows sometime before I was born. The floors were unstable enough to collapse at any moment, and I wasn't allowed up there, but I went anyways. There was a tiny narrow staircase that led to the upstairs. The steps themselves cracked with every step. When I reached the top of the stairs, there was writing on the wall that said, "Home Sweet Home." There was writing on the door leading to the living quarters with the writing Finkville. The rest was pitch black with nothing living there with the exception of a large nest which I've never seen occupied. There was writing on the walls of men's names with arrows pointing to the nearest room. There were glass bottles all over the place, covered and filled with dirt and dust. I found a few strange artifacts, one of which was a weird license plate nailed to the floor for some odd reason. One thing that always perplexed me was a small torn piece of fabric with a flower pattern on it that I can only imagine belonged to either a tablecloth or a women's dress. Got a few. Abandoned factory had an underground complex. Used to be used for storage and went under the rest of the block, including the old workers' house, which Jekyll's now were just people's homes. To get down there, we had to put a grappling hook through some pipes and lower down on a harness. After that, we had to shimmy along some beams, still on harness, over an open sewer. Got all the way down, and after each of us made it, we walked around, went under the houses and found they were being held up by very old wood beams, several of which had fallen and others had rot. Abandoned Maintvies tunnel in Philly. Found a room someone made in the dirt through some broken cement. It was full of women's underwear and child's bathing suits, most likely stolen from the nearby pools, lost and found. Abandoned house had someone living in it who was very mad that we were there and very high. Basically told him we are leaving, and if he keeps advancing, I'll kill him while holding my hook. Abandoned house, pile of dead animals. Someone was collecting roadkill and just letting it rot in the basement. Abandoned house of an old murderer who was arrested. Bloody teddy bear. Left an anonymous tip on that one and found out later in the paper was animal blood, luckily. Abandoned house, fuck den. This was in an upscale neighborhood with a bank-owned manor. I actually had permission to be here. The bank had put out a thing looking for a junk removal service, and I won the contract for saying, I'll do it for free. Had a hauling truck and references swing. I've done it before. Walked through, and the one door was locked. Called, asked if they had a key. They said no. I asked, so what then? They said I could break the frame as it was going to be replaced. The picture I sent showed how it was crooked. I found out how hard kicking a door down is when it's metal with a metal frame. Got in with a crowbar. Whole room only had a circular mattress on the floor, rope, a ball gag, lube, and condoms. I laughed until I remember I had to remove it. House of a dead teacher. Lots of pictures of students, some pulled from Facebook, MySpace. Really weird. Hi, small-time YouTuber with a mild interest in urbex. Me and two friends went out to this abandoned neighborhood. Now that in it of itself can be pretty spooky, but while we were there was one particular house that left a lasting impression on us. Midway into recording, I was trying to set up a shot of me and friends doing a humorous improv in the kitchen. As I tried to get them over, there were a few crunches of glass, and one of the others approached me asking if I heard the crunching of the glass. We went to go investigate, but couldn't find any immediate signs of people. At first, I presumed it was a small animal mucking about. Meanwhile, the other two were sold that it was ghostly activity and were afraid to step back inside. This is where things got a bit strange for me. I went back in while they stayed out. I began calling out some crude questions. However, as I began to ask, I was cut off by what sounded like a sigh or whisper that was very different from my voice. I checked around, but as before, I was the only one anywhere near that particular area, and the nearby freeway noise would have drowned out any shouts they made from where they were. I came back out to ask if they were anywhere near me, and they said no. They were ready to leave, but I wanted to stick around a little longer, seeing if I could provoke whatever entity rested within that house. Unfortunately, my attempts were unsuccessful. Regardless, that house sits as one of my creepiest explorations yet. Since I'm a little new to urbex, This may be subject to change in the near-distant future.